The MEI Art Gallery showcases the most exciting contemporary and modern art from the Middle East. Our current exhibit, Perceptible Rhythms, Alternative Temporalities, features 12 artists who explore the impact of conflict, urbanization, and the climate crisis on their environments. Open Monday through Friday from 10 to 5 p.m., the MEI Art Gallery is open to the public, or book your visit today at mei.edu/arts and culture center. From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Middle East Focus, the Middle East Institute's podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy. My name is Intissar Fakir. I'm the director of the North Africa and Sahel program and a senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute hosting today's episode. Today, we will take a closer look at Tunisia's ongoing political and economic challenges. Tunisia has been in the news lately for various developments. The seating of a weakened parliament. As a quick reminder here, President Kais Saied suspended parliament on July 25th of 2021. Over the past year and a half, he has implemented his own political revision process for Tunisia. This process has involved a number of steps, including a nominal popular consultation. It included also a unilateral constitutional revision that was voted in last year by referendum. There was also a revision of most big laws, including election laws, a restructuring of major state institutions, not just elected ones like parliament, but election monitoring bodies, other state institutions that either manage the functioning of key structures, like, for example, journalism and broadcasting. The judiciary is another example. And then there was also a parliamentary election with a low voter turnout. The new parliament was finally seated in February. There is a big debate about its legitimacy given the low voter turnout and the boycott of most major parties. Meanwhile, the president has been doubling down on his populist and xenophobic rhetoric and approach. See the comments that he has made in March about sub-Saharan migrants in Tunisia, the turnover in government ministers who have either been sacked or left, local councils that have been restructured, and local officials have also been sacked. And more recently, the rate of arrests of opposition figures and critical figures has also increased, including the arrest of the Islamist Ennahda party last week, Rashid Ghannouchi. And more crucial also is the economic context in which all of this is playing out. High inflation, the state is also facing a liquidity crunch that is manifesting in food shortages. An IMF loan for Tunisia was negotiated last year, but no agreement was reached, and the president essentially walked away, at least for now, from an IMF deal. And more financial challenges are also coming around the corner as some debt repayment deadlines are coming up as well. So a long list of challenges, and I'm fortunate to have two excellent guests. Lilia Blaise, a freelance multimedia journalist based in Tunisia for the past 7 years. She's mainly working as a TV correspondent for French television channel France 24 and for several radio and online media outlets. Also with me today is Chiraz Arbi, a Tunisian civil society activist and development practitioner. She specializes in parliamentary strengthening and decentralization, where she has supported post-2011 parliamentarians and municipal councils for more transparency, participation, and accountability. Welcome both. So it seems whenever we do a podcast on Tunisia, that list of troubles gets longer, unfortunately. So Chiraz, let me start with you on the political front. As I mentioned, there's a new parliament that was seated earlier this year. Of course, there's the question of legitimacy of parliament, but there are also a number of other challenges that are facing this new parliament. Can you talk us through some of these issues that you are seeing on your end?
Thank you. Actually, in order to understand the political dynamics that led also to the election of the parliament, we need to understand the legal and political environment in which these legislative elections took place. So first of all, the removal of the party system that was replaced by candidates-based election actually paved the way for the absence of any policy discussion, any debate on major issues actually in Tunisia: health, food security, education, employment. So candidates individually were presenting local projects in their constituencies. And it actually has further diminished hopes, especially among political elites and civil society, of moving from ideological politics to policy-oriented politics. In Tunisia, since 2011, ideology has taken a major role in defining and shaping political debate. And civil society was hoping to move to a policy debate that will make the candidates and the party present their positions on the different issues. So to move to an issue-based politics. The new voting system did not enable this transition, and it actually further diminished that. The second thing is the rules of the game also has diminished any hope for representation. The absence of state funding enabled those who have power and money to be candidates. The removal of positive discrimination measures did not enable youth and women to be represented. And the absence of threshold, like electoral threshold of representation, made it that any candidate with even 10 votes can gain a seat in the parliament. So all these environmental, legal, and political dynamics has made it that this parliament has been questioned in terms of its legitimacy and representativeness. So it is in this dynamic that the parliament was elected. And if you want to look at its powers, the parliament has three major prerogatives. And under Kais Saied, the legislative power became a legislature function, and it is actually reflected in the very limited powers it has. So if we look at the legislative prerogative, MPs can propose draft laws, but the President of the Republic's draft laws has priority over the pieces of legislation presented by members of parliament. So this has an impact on legislative power and the dynamic to shape and to influence public policies. Also, in terms of the opposition has a major role to play in terms of democratic power and the balance of power. Yet, even though this parliament recognizes the existence of an opposition within the parliament, there was no tools and mechanisms proposed to enable the opposition to play its role, to propose alternative public policies, and to challenge the majority. In 2014 constitution, for example, grants the opposition the presidency of the Committee of Finance and Budget, which is one of the major important sitting committees in the parliament. It also grants the opposition the power to constitute investigation committees. This parliament does not have and does not provide the opposition with any tools and mechanism, which really diminishes its power and limits its power compared to the 2014 constitution. If we look also at the very important function of the parliament, which is the government oversight, while the current draft of the rules of legislation, the rules of procedure, the current draft of the rules of procedure that is being examined now in the parliament, we can see that the members of parliament has the right and the possibility to formulate oral and written questions. Yet the constitutional rationale of 2022 constitution places the government under the authority of the president. So the government is responsible to the president of the republic. So while the government can respond to the questions of members of parliament, it's not accountable to the parliament. So the parliament has no power to, for example, provide or grant a vote of no confidence to dissolve the government, like it was stipulated in the constitution in 2022. So this is also another indication that the parliament cannot be a mover and shaker in the political scene because it has very limited power in comparison to the president of the republic's power. The last power, which is the representative power, is granted to the second chamber because in this 2022 constitution, we have two parliamentary chambers. So we have the Assembly of the Representatives of the People and we have the National Council of Districts and Region. It is this council who has this representative mandate. And so we can see that the new parliament has actually, as we can say, no teeth.
Is there a sense of when there's going to be an election of the second chamber that you mentioned, or the National District Council?
So actually, the Assembly of the Representatives of the People is supposed to draft a law for the new chamber. That was actually what civil society and political actors thought before, but now it turned out that the president will actually draft the law by decree. Since July 25, I have been ruling by executive decrees. And this is also a very important thing, because it was supposed to be, legally speaking, that by the election of this parliament, the state of exception will end. However, till this day, the state of exception did not end, and there was an extension of the state of emergency. So Tunisia till now is under the state of exception and the state of emergency, giving the president sweeping powers to legislate even with the existence of this parliament and with the election of this parliament.
So thanks for that, Chiraz. Okay, we have a parliament that's not really fully representative of the broader Tunisian population. There are questions about its legitimacy given the way the election was conducted. As you outlined, there's less focus on public policies. There is also the question of functions. This parliament doesn't arguably play the functions that a parliament is meant to play. Lilia, can you step back and sort of help situate this troubling parliamentary dynamics in the broader political picture? What does this mean for the government? Chiraz mentioned a little bit the role of government. What does this mean essentially for the working of the states? And within this context, what are the new sort of fault lines? And who does this dynamic empower beyond the president himself?
I think we have to go back, to the 25th of July 2021, when Kais Saied basically took power and freezed the former parliament and also fired the prime minister. At that time, I don't know if you remember, but not a lot of Tunisians went in front of the parliament to support their parliament, which was, an institution that has been voted after the revolution. And a lot of political and pundits agreed on having a parliament and a semi-parliamentary regime for the new era that Tunisia was entering into after the uprising. So I think, it sort of shows the difficult period we have been facing for quite a while, where people are not really attached to the parliament, mostly because of all the political dysfunctionments, all the problems with the instability of the former governments. Just to remind you, we had at least a dozen different governments in 10 years, so almost one government per year. And because of all of that, a lot of people sort of, disliked the political scene, didn't see the utility or, how efficient the parliament was. They perceived the parliament basically as a place where political parties were just quarreling between each other. And so this image stuck a lot. And that's why we faced a sort of disinterest from the population when Kais Saied freezed the parliament and then dissolved the parliament. It didn't create that much of, I would say, the expected indignation that we would have expected. So now I would say it's just the continuity of all that. It's just that you have a sort of gray area where you have a new constitution that is reinforcing the power of the president over the power of the institutions such as the parliament and the second chamber, as Chiraz was explaining, which has not been put in place, which is the chamber of districts and regions. So basically in the new constitution, even if you have two chambers, they don't have a lot of power. You have a lot of power for the president. You don't have an actual decentralization process. It's more about a very complicated political project from Kais Saied, which is basically electing local representatives that will then be electing other representatives to sort of compose this new chamber of the regions. And so on paper, it's supposed to be what he's always saying, the power back to the people. But if you read the constitution on a legal basis and, with what political experts have been saying, is basically empowering presidential power and backslide to what we have known before under Ben Ali's regime and even under Bourguiba. So I don't know if these new dynamics right now, I don't know who it sort of benefits to. I mean, apart from Kais Saied, because basically, as Chiraz said, we don't have a parliament that is very empowered. To give you an example, the first day the parliament was entering the headquarters of the parliament with the new members and stuff, we went as journalists to cover this event, which is supposed to be, a big event because, the new elected MPs are taking their seats, and it was forbidden foreign media and also local media to cover this event. It created a big uproar among the media scene. I mean, even us, we don't really understand why they wouldn't let us enter. And then they had to vote between themselves to agree on letting journalists actually enter the parliament. Right now, I would say, the only person or political key player that we can see, and we can't even interview him, is the president. And we don't really have any more dynamics or even reference. We don't really know what is this kind of regime, because some people are saying, oh, it's, all the red flags that we are, shifting to a dictatorship are there. And at the same time, it's difficult because you still have people in the streets that are able to express themselves, but there is also a crackdown on the political opposition. So I would say it's a gray area where any shift towards something that looks like a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime is very incremental and very insidious. And the only thing that I can say is that we don't really have keys to understand these new dynamics. We basically have to analyze with what we've got, which is just the press release and communication of the presidency on the Facebook page of the presidency. That's, what it comes down to. You don't have a lot of debate. As I was saying, the MPs are not really debating on a political level. I mean, I think they were still finishing the règlement intérieur last time. So there is not an actual debate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in a way, picking up on something that you said, Lilia, you said in some way it's sort of a complicated project, his vision for Tunisia, but in another way, it's also a fairly sort of straightforward, I think, approach, which is, I think from the day that Kais Saied has been elected, it was very clear, in his perception, what he identified as what was going on, what was going wrong with Tunisia's political landscape, which is that it was too decentralized. It needed to sort of be injected with some kind of efficiency. And this whole idea of sort of bringing kind of Tunisia back to Tunisians, or sort of the direct rule of the people, has taken on this interesting characteristic where he is somehow equating himself with the people, right? So he says, if we want to bring Tunisia back to the people, then it all has to go through me. And my question to you, as you mentioned a little bit, some of the sort of nuances and the difficulties of public opinion around that, is at what point is that kind of equation going to start to sort of crack? This idea that Kais Saied represents Tunisians and that he's the only one that can implement their vision and he's the only one that understands what they need. At what point is that going to start cracking or losing support?
I think it's a very good question, honestly, because that's what we have been asking since he took power. Because, the way he took power was a relief for a lot of people because, as I was saying, people were fed up with the political scene. There was a sanitary crisis with the pandemic. So it was like, a relief. Even some of the elites supported this. And then I remember maybe 2 weeks after, when he started, to speak and to say why he did that, question came and people were saying, but how long does this period of exception will last? We don't have a constitutional court, so we can't really see if he's doing the right thing according to the constitution, or he seems to differ a bit. And so I remember those questions were there, and some people who were opposed to Kais Saied in the first place were saying, we are giving him 2 months and then, people will just be fed up with him like they were with the political scene, and there will be someone new or it will be cracking. And I remember very well because people were saying that. And then, it sort of went on. Kais Saied put in place presidential decrees where he monopolized powers. As Chiraz said, step by step, he sort of, starting to reform and basically fire people in the judiciary. He dissolved the High Commission for the Independence of Justice, which is basically an institution that appoints judges and protect them for any political influence. And all of this, people were saying, oh, no, it can't go on. And, all these are red flags and people are starting to turn their back on Kais Saied, but it didn't happen. And I think there are several reasons for that. First, because there is a growing gap between the elites and their understanding of the political scene and what actually the Tunisian people, and I'm not representing them, but most of Tunisian people are seeing in Kais Saied, which is something that the elites, they didn't really appropriate problematics such as social justice or the need to see the goals of the revolution be taken more seriously. And that's why we called Kais Saied a sort of comeback from what the people were asking from the revolution, because he, in a way, he was representing that, like a sort of back to the roots, back to the core of our uprising in his discourse, not in his actions. But that's why he was elected, because he was elected president with 70%, which was, a very, very big deal at the time. So I think there was this growing gap between the elites who are not really seeing anymore what was the Tunisian people expecting. And then you had also a rhetoric from the president that worked very well and that is working until now, which is, we are for the Tunisian people and they are the corrupted, the traitors, and all those people who want to do bad things for the country, who are not working in the interest of the country. And he kept on saying that for 2 years in all of his speeches. If you analyze his speeches, there is always the word traitor, corrupted, and he never named anyone. But he was always saying that. And for people, it's like the perfect scapegoat, We have a savior. And on the other side, we have people who are against us, who took our money, who led the country to economic failure with all the political quarrels. And so basically this sort of very simple speech, but also very smart, because people needed a scapegoat and didn't like the fact that none of the political parties took responsibility before for everything that was going wrong into the transition. It worked. And I think that's why it's so difficult to know now what is the sort of tolerance rates for people, because we kind of try to see indicators such as, bad economy, inflation leading to protests, but it's not that simple. I think people really want to sort of start a new phase, and I think they trust Kais Saied to do that. Some of them. I'm not saying all Tunisian people are supporting him, but he still has support despite everything that unfolded in the last 2 years.
Yeah, we'll get to the economy question in a moment, but it's a really powerful point. The way in which Kais Saied and I think other populists managed to capitalize on popular anger, popular disenfranchisement, on this hope for some kind of resolution to problems that have lingered for frankly far too long. and problems that a lot of times when the population looks at just fails to understand why they have not been addressed. So I think that's a really powerful point that he's been able to play. But there is another aspect of society that seems to kind of have been swept up a little bit in this, which is civil society and the role of civil society. And for this, Shiraz, I want to turn to you a little bit. There are concerns about the ability of civil society to continue its role, not just sort of broadly defined civil society, but also, civil society that works on specific issues. To what extent do you think civil society can continue to play its role given the political landscape that we have just talked about?
So the role of civil society after July 25 has been diminished since Kais Said's politics is based on the removal of any intermediate body. So civil society used to have a space to challenge state officials and to propose alternative policies in order to shape public policies at the national and the local level. For example, with the local council, civil society used to have to participate in sessions and to debate with the municipal council's members and to actually influence policies at the local level. All these mechanisms were removed and became absent. So civil society has no access anymore, neither to the government nor to the presidency of the republic, and the same at the local level since municipal councils have been dissolved. So civil society finds itself in a very difficult situation because even in terms of protests, the use of the exceptional period and the use of the emergency state has been used to prohibit civil society to peacefully demonstrate and to express their views and to challenge government. So civil society needs to find alternative ways to challenge the government, to express, to present alternatives, but also to represent citizens, because it is, as Lilia said, there is a huge fraction between civil society and citizens, because citizens at some point saw civil society as part of the elite, that they are disconnected, that they don't represent the voices of the citizens. And so they placed them at the same level as political parties. This was also nurtured by Kais Said's narrative and discourses, where he placed political parties and civil society at the same level. So I think civil society at this point needs to find new ways of participating in governance. But what is mostly needed from civil society at this point is to continue working on local issues. Local governance constitute a major place and a major opportunity for civil society to influence, to help citizens in local issues, for example, environment, urbanism, social affairs, humanitarian roles. So all of these issues, civil society in Tunisia has gained a lot of experience and know-how over the last 10 years. And so I think this also needs to continue, because the attack on civil society also is an attack on its legitimacy in a way that it is not representative, that it serves the elite's interests. So civil society needs to go back to the roots and need to be placed at the grassroots level and to give a new also identity and a new image of its power and how it is really important in society, because the narrative, the social narrative, the media narrative has been questioning its legitimacy and its utility.
So basically, Shiraz, what you're saying is that, regardless of the sort of political environment, or maybe because of the political environment and the crackdown that might entail, where civil society can really invest right now is sort of re-strengthening its grassroots ties, ensuring that it sort of, does not lose sight of the very population that it's supposed to serve and to kind of help support, working particularly on public policy issues, specific issues, and governance issues where there is a real need right now. Okay, I want to also just briefly touch a little bit on the economy, because I think the economic picture is really interesting, particularly looking at it specifically in terms of the deal with the IMF. And what I keep wondering is that, Kais Saied's government under Prime Minister Najla Bouden and her team came up with a reform plan that they submitted to the IMF for negotiation that would be the basis for a loan that they would get. They began implementing some of the elements of this deal to instill some confidence in their ability to carry it out. They managed to secure a staff level agreement late last year, I think it was December. And then the president made an announcement a few weeks ago, essentially condemning the deal, making it seem as though this was sort of imposed on Tunisia by external actors, although essentially this is his government that negotiated the plan to secure the loan. Now, part of that I understand, which is this is the president's general approach, this kind of ideology, sort of anti-imperialist, anti-global institutions, anti-IFIs, etc. But I'm curious, how is Tunisia going to carry on without this kind of international support, without this kind of money, basically, of budgetary support? Tunisia does have a little bit of support that it receives from few remaining partners like Algeria, some budgetary support from the EU as well, I think particularly Italy and France. But the impact of the economic crisis has been quite substantial on citizens. Chiraz, can you tell us a little bit about what does this economic situation look like for Tunisian citizens?
So inflation is skyrocketing. Actually, the power of average Tunisian to respond to his family's basic needs is under threat. This is leading to a huge number of irregular migration, and there is a lot of calls for the government to respond to especially youth needs for employment, because employment is also skyrocketing. More than 16% of youth are unemployed. This is even more present in the interior regions and in the region that has been disadvantaged. And I would like to say that the decentralization process that started in 2014 through the decentralization law and then through the election had the objective to deal with local government issues, because the centralization has been unable to respond to the specific needs of development in the interior regions. Kais Saied has ended the decentralization process, has dissolved municipal councils, and has no alternative policy to tackle unemployment and poverty at the local level. And so this has impacted youth, who has responded in two ways. First of all, their disengagement from formal politics that is shown, as I said earlier, in the very low turnout. And second, an irregular migration towards Europe. There is unprecedented proportions, and that is youth are immigrating in large numbers, even though during wintertime. Usually during wintertime, the number are reduced, but this time, exceptionally, the number are very high, which is unusual, which is also reflects youth despair and the fact that they don't see any economic solutions, they don't see any future in this country, that they prefer to risk their lives and hope for a better future for them or their families. We're now seeing whole families immigrating, including mothers, women, babies, that are willing to take a chance. So this whole situation is really impacting stability in Tunisia and in the region, in the Mediterranean, in North Africa, in Europe. It's a very catastrophic situation in the fact that it can impact the whole region. Another aspect also is climate change, and Tunisia is facing a lot of challenges in terms of water, food security, and this also have a huge impact on the economy, on the agriculture sector, on farmers, but also on the prices of essential products. So this is also making the middle class, which has been a distinctive feature of Tunisia, is diminishing, and the poverty rate is taking also unprecedented proportions.
Thank you, Chiraz. Lilia, I want to get your thoughts on this because this very much touches on the issue that both you and Chiraz have brought up in terms of sort of this gap between, people and elite, etc., and this sort of space that Kais Saied has been able to take up and use to his advantage. But economically, there are very few alternatives to an IMF deal for Tunisia. There's not a lot of other, international supporters lining up to support the country beyond the two that I mentioned. So Why is Kais Saied cutting off the deal at this stage? I mean, again, I realize this is part of his MO, but do you think he feels that he can withstand greater economic pressures that are likely to come with a no IMF deal, or even worse, with a default if Tunisia were to default?
I think it's very coherent with, his political line, because he keeps on saying that, he's pro national sovereignty. He doesn't want Tunisia to be dependent on, foreign funds. And also it's in the line of some left-oriented groups who have been, against getting into more debt with the IMF for several years. I mean, there has been a debate which was not really under the eye of the mainstream media, but among a lot of civil society members and also economic experts saying, is it really a good thing that Tunisia gets into more debt? Because it's already taking a big toll on the economy. Because basically the IMF deal enables us to get foreign currency, basically to also provide for the cost for the products we import. So, it's a lot of economists have been saying we need to sort of, reorganize the whole economy to not be dependent on that. And even the IMF and even people who are pro deal with the IMF are saying the IMF deal is only a sort of band-aid on the wound, but it's not enough to get us back on our feet. And I think that's also a good thing, because I think we have never that much debated about the economy than in the last 2 years, which was, a request from a lot of people since the revolution. But because of the political transition, because of all the political changes the country was facing, it was not really a priority into the national debate. Now everyone is talking about that. As Chiraz said, everyone is talking about the issue with water, the issue with the harvest that is not going to be good because of the heat, because of the lack of chemicals. And a lot of those things, I think it's good that we are addressing them now, even if it's in a very, very difficult context. To go back to your question, I think it's difficult to know what the intentions of Kais Saied are, because basically all we have are his speeches, and his speeches are political. They are not really based on anything factual. He hasn't given any alternative plan or any roadmap for the economy. I think also we must maybe be cautious. I mean, his speech was really, as you said, a sort of putting an end to any deal. It was a political speech from a president. And as Chiraz said and you said, the government asked for the deal and already started implementing reforms. And this same government sent a Tunisian delegation to Washington recently to talk with the IMF. So it's not completely done. There might be some changes in the coming months. And then in regards of other loaners or people who would support Tunisia, that's a very good question, because I don't think it's that easy to turn towards other countries. I mean, there has been, a support from Algeria, but Algeria has been helping Tunisia financially as well. But we're talking about a loan of $1.9 billion from the IMF. And the need of the Tunisian budget is evaluated between 1.5 and $1.8 billion. So I mean, I don't think any country right now can give that much money to Tunisia. And even the IMF deal, it's implemented in a plan between 4 and 5 years. It's not 1 billion that we will have this year if it works. So I think, it was a political move that made sense with his political line and what he has been saying all along. But it's difficult to know how he will handle any more pressure on the dinar, any more growing of the inflation. To give you an example, in some cities, you have people who worked all their lives to buy a house, who are actually now selling the house and prefer to rent something because they are not able to provide for their family. So they prefer to, sell the house, get a small amount of money and cash, and be able to provide for their family and pay a rent. So it's like a step backwards to what, a lot of Tunisians used to do before. The dream of Tunisians middle class in the last 20 years was basically to get a good job in a public service, and then to build a house at the end of their lives to be able to leave something for their children. Now, I mean, no one is talking about building a house, even less about buying one. And we can see that also with the cars. It's very difficult to buy a new car because most of the cars are imported. So, of course, with the devaluation of the dinar and the inflation, nobody can afford a good car.
I completely agree with you, Lilia. I think what you are talking about is the sort of systemic impoverishment of Tunisians and of people that we are noticing. The extent to which economic vulnerability is increasing as people burn through their life savings so they can afford to pay for daily basics like food and gas, etc. And I think the point that you make about the IMF deal is really interesting. The IMF deal, sort of in contrast to this rhetoric about the need for a much bigger economic restructuring. But the thing is, these two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Tunisia can get a deal while at the same time thinking about a bigger economic structuring. And yes, we are talking about it. And yes, Tunisia is talking about it. But there is zero indication that that's something is happening, which brings me back again to Kais Saied. And I think this is, to me, this is an interesting dichotomy, right? The economy is his Achilles heel. The economy is the biggest issue that's facing Tunisia, arguably. Yet the economy is also still not something that has fully caught up with him, and it has not changed popular perceptions towards him and towards his tenure. So that's a really interesting dynamic.
If I can add something, maybe it has caught up to him, but in his speeches, what he's saying is basically the economy is bad because we have corruption, because we have people stealing the country resources, because we have businessmen taking advantage of the poor. So it's very populist. It's non-fact based speech, but that sort of, has an impact in some of the supporters of the president. And so I think for him, according to his speeches, because we don't have much more to analyze his policy, but for him the economy is basically reduced to that. Like, it's because of speculation, it's because of corruption that we are not moving forward. And there is a part of truth, because we know that there are monopolies around certain sectors. We know that the corruption is an issue, and we know that, there is a part of truth. But the way he's addressing these matters and the way he's fighting them is not at all showing any policy. It's more showing, random arrests and also a crackdown on several people who are working in the production and distribution channels without any effective impact in the end. To give you a very quick example, the government said, there are a lot of speculations during Ramadan on the prices of some fruits and vegetables. So we are going to impose prices on some food and vegetables. Okay, that's a good idea. Why not? But then the Ministry of Trade imposed a fixed price on the banana, which is not something people, usually need. It's not like pasta or flour or necessary goods that you need to cook. Like, banana is considered as a luxury. But because, the bananas were 8 dinars, they say, no, it's too expensive. We need to put it at 5 dinars. So it created a whole chain of problems. First, because the importers of bananas, because we are not producing our bananas, we're saying we are buying the fruit more expensive than we are selling it. So we are completely losing money over this. And then people in the markets, whenever they were seeing someone putting another price, were saying, oh, this guy is like basically, encouraging speculation. He's selling his bananas to 7 and 8 dinars, whereas the president said it should be 5. And so it created so many problems, for food that's not even something that you need to survive, that it's one of the many examples of how the economical issues are addressed right now.
Yeah, and it's just sort of a points to the extremely haphazard way in which he tends to approach these sort of issues, and the lack, I think, of institutional thinking around them when you leave these kind of things to one person. Chiraz, go ahead.
So actually, the reform of the economy necessitates a political vision. And so the failure to go towards a reform or structural reform the economy reflects the failure of this model that Kais Saied presented, which is politics without politicians. The head of the government, Najla Boudin, and the ministers are all coming from administration. So they are executors. They have no political baggage. They have no political vision. They are here to execute. So not to propose solutions, but just to work on something they already know. So this is also part of the reason why the country is not presenting a viable economic model, since the old economic model is ending, which is the state-led economy, where the state provides everything to the citizens, where the state takes all major companies, etc. So this model has proved its limited and limitations and needs to move to another and a different economic model. But we need a political vision for that, and politicians who have this political vision and who are able to take all necessary measures to present this model, to present its features, and then to implement it, to evaluate it, which is how public policies are shaped in modern economies. This is all absent in the administration, in Tunisia administration, where it doesn't function based on public policies development, implementation, evaluation, but just actions and just measures that are not connected and have no objective. All these models need to be changed, but we don't have the necessary leaders who can take these measures and can move to a different model.
Sorry, can I add something on what Chiraz said?
Sure. Go ahead.
Just very quick, I think I totally agree with Chiraz. I think when you ask me, what's next and when will it crack, when will we see the end of this, at least, even in a positive way, even if Kais Saied managed, to lead the country towards something better, I don't know. But I think it's, as Chiraz said, it's really the lack of vision or something that goes beyond, we are surrounded by traitors speech. That's what we are really lacking right now. And a lot of people were saying the issue with Kais Saied since he took power is not only the fact that he wants to fight everyone. That's okay. We have corruption. Let's go down this road. But the issue is he's not unifying people. He's dividing people. And we already have a lot of fractures. We have fractures between classes. We have economical fractures that are more and more present right now in the country. So instead of having a speech that sort of rally people together, it's just divide people. And that's the main issue. And that's why we can't really see beyond, the next months in terms of politics, in terms of economy. A lot of people are saying, there is an expression in Tunisian, we are running straight into a wall. There is the same expression in Arabic. And, a lot of people are saying that because they can't really see what's next.
Absolutely. That's a very important point, Lilia. I think the extent to which Tunisia has been polarized is really remarkable. And what makes it even more difficult to understand this polarization is that it doesn't necessarily have clear ideological lines. It doesn't necessarily have sort of one party versus the other. It's more about, who supports Kais Saied's policies and his lack of vision, I should say, and sort of this haphazard way versus those who don't. And those who don't, unfortunately, don't have a lot of actors to rally around. So let me close this conversation with one question that I want to get some of your insights on, which is the question of international support and kind of the role of Tunisia within the broader international field. It has been remarkable to me the extent to which Tunisia has been isolated, increasingly isolated. Tunisia was once a very friendly country with a lot of global support. And suddenly, I think we find it under the leadership of Kais Saied increasingly isolated. What I'm curious about is how can international partners that are still interested in working with Tunisia, that are still interested in supporting Tunisia, what can they do and how can they support Tunisia at this moment, either without particularly strengthening the president or even just how to work with Tunisia despite this president who tends to have a lot of strong opinions about different actors and where Tunisia fits in. Lilia, we'll start with you.
I think it's all about right now, it's all about being practical, if I may say. France and Italy and the European Union have issues with, interfering with what's happening in Tunisia right now. First, because, in the past, the role of France was severely condemned in Tunisia. We had a minister advising Ben Ali for, sending French police to help with the unrest in 2011. So it was like France has taken lesson from that and is sort of, backtracking about taking any severe position against Tunisia. So what I would say is that the support from the European Union and France and Italy have been very practical until now. They are basically saying we are preoccupied with this and this, this arrest or this violation of human rights, and we are following what's happening. But they can't really do anything more because of the immigration issues. Because if, we have a collapse of the economy or a collapse of the regime, it will lead to more immigration. And as Chiraz said, there is already a surge. And I have been covering that in the last few months. The amount of boats leaving the city of Sfax, which is on the east of the country, is like 300%, according to the National Guard, more than at the same period last year. And we are not even at the high of the surge, which is more in the summer.
Lilia, this is an important point. I want you to pause here for a minute and reflect on this, because this has been the basis of some very problematic rhetoric that we have heard, not just coming from the president, but also it reflects some public sentiment, which is this idea that, migration from Tunisia is largely a sub-Saharan migrant issue, which is not necessarily the case, right?
No, you have in the 30,000 migrants who arrived on the Italian coast last year, you have more Tunisians than sub-Saharans. You have a lot of sub-Saharans compared to other years, but the Tunisians are still the highest migrants coming from Tunisia.
I think that's a very important point to make, particularly because I think there's been a lot of negative sentiment and a lot of it's been an opportunity to, let's say, spread a lot of hate and racism, even though that's not particularly what the migration picture looks like.
Yeah, I think the issue is that, there was the issue of the speech of the president about the sub-Saharan migration in Tunisia that led to, a series of violations, issues with sub-Saharans, people, getting evicted from their homes, having to be repatriated by their own countries. That was like the 2 last months were really hard to cover regarding human rights and migration. But then there is also another issue, which is that Tunisia has been a country of transit for most migrants from sub-Saharan countries in Africa and also the West Africa to go to Italia, because a lot of other roads of migration have been closed, such as the roads from Algeria have been closed, Libya as well. And also Tunisians used to go to Serbia without a visa and then go to Europe on the road, not on the sea. And then also Serbia, I think it was by the end of last year, also imposed a visa. So most of the roads of migration towards Europe are closed now, and Tunisia is one of the only ways to get to Italy. So that's why, it has becoming both a local problems because there are the sub-Saharans workforce in Tunisia who is undocumented, and also because, Tunisians don't have the means to stop all those people going on the European coasts. So that's why I was saying, I think even if Tunisia has to stay on a political level the beacon of hope, because it's the only standing, work in progress democracy after the Arab uprisings. I think right now the way foreign supports are seeing things is very practical and trying to be a diplomat about everything. I think the US has more leverage to sort of say, this is not a democratic move. This is not checking any of our democratic criteria. So the US has been a more severe, but the interests are not the same, and they have been actually taking measures. They basically diminished a bit the military help support for Tunisian army. But, they have also interest because it's not in their interest that there is an instability in the region of Sahel. So it's, I would say it's realpolitik. It's just the foreign supporters of Tunisia are just, trying to get on with what's going on in the country. And also, a French diplomat say that, and I think it's accurate to say that. He said, it's not up to us to decide for the Tunisian people. If people are supporting Kais Saied, if people are not shouting in the streets against him, we can't really go against that. And I think, it's also a diplomatic way of saying we can't really more interfere than that,
Absolutely. Chiraz, what's your message to the international community?
Maybe first of all, I would like to emphasize the fact that for the last 10 years, international support for Tunisia has been driven by two distinctive factors. The first factor, which is based on fear of especially European countries, for Tunisia to be a country that has no borders management, that will enable a huge immigration from sub-Saharan Africans, but also from Tunisians who have been going through the coast in large numbers. So their politics has been to support the government and institutions in the immigration, the management of immigration. The second factor, which is led by the US, is to promote democracy in the first democratic Arab Muslim majoritarian country, which is actually challenges the Huntington's thesis on the matching or the compatibility between democracy and Islam. So Tunisia's model was to be promoted as an exception and as a possibility to have democracy and Islam going hand in hand. So now, with all these political changes and challenges, the fear is still driving the political support and the institutional support by Europe. But I think whether it is fear or promoting democracy, I think other governments should continue on supporting Tunisians' youth, Tunisian civil society, because this is the one that will make the real change. Civil society still have legitimacy and the hope to influence the country, to make the country move towards a real democracy and to move towards a real democratic governance. So I believe that support should continue, but should not be based on these two factors alone, but also should be in response to youth desires and hope for their country.
We will have to leave it here today. I want to thank our guests for their opinions, and I want to also underline that for both of them, their opinions do not reflect their institutional positions. I would also like to thank our production team for their work on this episode, and thank you, our listeners, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. For more North Africa and Sahel content, please check out our website, www.mei.edu. You can also follow MEI on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I am Intissar Fakir, and this has been Middle East Focus.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.